My name is Evelyn, and I am 69 years old. As a retired real estate investor, I meticulously built a substantial property portfolio over 4 decades, ensuring my financial independence through careful planning and disciplined saving. My crown jewel was my beautiful $750,000 home, completely paid off and free of any debt. I generously provided my daughter Miranda, her husband David, and my beloved grandchildren, Ethan and Chloe, with a rent-free accessory dwelling unit on my property for 2 years, a testament to my unwavering maternal support and my absolute belief in their shared success and our unbreakable familial bonds. Then a terrifying default notice arrived in my mailbox that shattered my world completely. Hidden within the legal jargon was the devastating truth: someone had taken out a secret substantial $150,000 second mortgage on my paid-off home without my knowledge or consent. The entire sum had been gambled away on cryptocurrency investments and lost. Miranda, through theatrical tears and desperate sobbing, begged me to sell my cherished home to save her from her massive $300,000 gambling debt. "You're losing your mind if you don't help your own daughter," she cried with manipulative desperation. "You have no humanity." David stood by in guilty silence, offering no defense of my rights or dignity. My integrity, my financial prudence, my very sanity, all viciously attacked and questioned. My dignity was stripped away by the very people I'd sacrificed everything to support. I felt utterly discarded, dehumanized, and profoundly disrespected. Yet as despair threatened to consume my spirit completely, a real estate investor's unwavering drive for justice and intimate knowledge of property law ignited a cold, determined fury within me. What Miranda, David, Ethan, Chloe, and their corrupt accomplice, Mr. Jenkins, didn't know was my secret weapon, discreet security cameras strategically placed throughout my home, had captured Miranda repeatedly practicing my signature at my own kitchen table, and recorded her explicitly discussing the fraudulent mortgage scheme with a corrupt loan officer, detailing her catastrophic $300,000 crypto gambling losses with chilling casualness. My trusted forensic document examiner ally waited patiently for my call. This time, their insidious fraud and breathtaking lack of humanity wouldn't just unravel. It would expose their shocking betrayal, reclaim my stolen home, and restore my dignity, proving once and for all that truth and justice triumph over family treachery and financial manipulation. The default notice arrived on a Tuesday morning that had started like any other, with me reviewing my investment portfolio over coffee in the sunroom of my beautiful home. The envelope bore the logo of a mortgage company I'd never heard of, and my first thought was that it must be a mistake, some clerical error that would be easily resolved with a phone call. But as I read the devastating contents, my hands began to shake uncontrollably. According to the official documents, I owed $150,000 on a second mortgage that had been taken out 18 months ago with my home as collateral. The loan was now in default, and foreclosure proceedings would begin within 30 days unless the full amount was paid immediately. My 70-year-old heart pounded as I tried to make sense of what I was reading. I had owned my home free and clear for over a decade. I had never applied for any mortgage, never signed any loan documents, never received any funds. Yet here was legal proof that someone had used my property as collateral for a massive loan that was now threatening to destroy everything I'd worked for. I immediately called Miranda and David, my voice shaking, as I explained the situation. "There's been some terrible mistake," I told them. "Someone has fraudulently taken out a mortgage on my home. I need you both here right away to help me figure out what's happened." Their response should have prepared me for what was coming. Instead of shock or outrage on my behalf, there was a long, guilty silence before Miranda said, "Mom will be right over. We need to talk." When they arrived at my home, an hour later, Miranda's face was already streaked with tears, and David looked like a man walking to his own execution. I led them into my living room, the same room where I'd celebrated their engagement, where I'd held my newborn grandchildren, where we'd shared countless family holidays. "Miranda," I began holding up the foreclosure notice. "Do you know anything about this mortgage? Because I certainly never." "Mom." Miranda interrupted, dissolving into theatrical sobs. "I can explain everything. I just wanted to help us all get rich. The crypto market was supposed to make us millionaires, but it crashed and now we're ruined." I stared at my daughter in disbelief. "What are you talking about? What does cryptocurrency have to do with my mortgage?" Through her tears, the devastating truth emerged. Miranda had somehow forged my signature and stolen my identity to take out a $150,000 second mortgage on my home. She had then gambled every penny of that money on volatile cryptocurrency investments, convinced she could multiply our family's wealth overnight. "I thought I could pay it back before you ever found out," she sobbed. "I thought we'd all be rich, and you'd thank me for being so smart with investments. But everything went wrong, and now I'm $300 in debt, and the mortgage company wants their money back." The casual way she described stealing my home's equity and gambling it away was breathtaking in its selfishness. But what came next was even worse. "You have to sell your house to save us," Miranda cried, grabbing my hands with desperate force. "Please, Mom, you're losing your mind. If you don't help your own daughter, you have no humanity. This is our family's survival. We're talking about..." David, who had been standing silently by the window, finally spoke. His words hit me like a physical blow. "Mom, Miranda tried to help our family's financial future," he said with the tone of someone explaining something to a confused child. "This is a mess, yes, but the house has to go to fix it. You're old. You don't need all this space anyway. It's time to downsize and help your family when they need you most." I felt the room spinning around me. These people, my own daughter and son-in-law, were treating the theft of my home's equity as if it were a minor family disagreement. They were demanding that I sacrifice my financial security to cover Miranda's gambling debts, and they were acting as if my resistance was evidence of selfishness or mental incapacity. "Miranda, David," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite my shock, "this house is my secure future. It's my financial independence, my safety net for old age. I never signed for any mortgage because I would never risk losing my home. You're asking me to sacrifice everything I've worked for to pay for reckless gambling." But my appeals to reason were met with increasingly desperate and manipulative responses. It was then that Ethan and Chloe, my beloved grandchildren, entered the room. At 16 and 14, they should have been old enough to understand the gravity of what was happening. Instead, they looked at me with expressions of impatience and disdain that chilled me to the bone. "Grandma," Ethan said, with the casual cruelty that only teenagers can achieve, "why are you being so selfish? Just sell the old house. It's for Mom, and Mom needs our help." Chloe giggled, actually giggled at my distress. "Yeah, Grandma, you're being crazy about this. It's just a house." Just a house. My life's work, my financial security, my carefully planned retirement, reduced to just a house by children who had benefited from my generosity their entire lives. The final humiliation came in the form of a phone call from Mr. Jenkins, the loan officer, who had apparently processed the fraudulent mortgage. His voice was cold and bureaucratic as he explained that the loan was completely legitimate according to his records. "Mrs. Patterson, you authorized this mortgage 18 months ago," he said with practiced indifference. The documents have your signature, your identification was verified, and the funds were dispersed according to your instructions. If you're experiencing memory issues regarding the transaction, that's unfortunate, but it doesn't change your legal obligations. Memory issues. He was suggesting that I was too mentally impaired to remember taking out a $150,000 loan. The implication was clear. Either I was a liar trying to avoid my debts, or I was suffering from dementia severe enough to forget major financial transactions. I never signed any such documents, I insisted. I've never even heard of your company before today. Ma'am, Mr. Jenkins replied with the patience one might use with a confused elderly person, we have all the proper documentation. Foreclosure proceedings will begin as scheduled unless the full amount is paid within 30 days. Over the following days, Miranda and David began a systematic campaign to pressure me into compliance. They brought in lawyers' letters threatening additional legal action if I didn't cooperate with the sale of my home. They suggested I was too stressed to handle my own finances and should sign over financial management to them. Mom, you're clearly overwhelmed by this situation, David said during one particularly tense conversation. Maybe it's time to admit you need help managing these complex financial matters. Miranda was even more direct in her manipulation. If you don't help us, we'll lose everything, she sobbed. The kids will have to change schools, we'll be homeless, and it will all be because you were too selfish to help your own family when we needed you most. The emotional blackmail was relentless and devastating. They were using my love for my grandchildren and my natural desire to help my family as weapons against me. They were painting my reasonable resistance to financial fraud as evidence of selfishness or mental incapacity. That night, I sat alone in my beautiful home, surrounded by 40 years of carefully collected furnishings and memories, and felt completely isolated. My own family was treating me like an obstacle to their financial recovery rather than the victim of their crimes. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated a woman who had spent her career understanding property law documentation and the importance of protecting her assets. They thought my age and my love for them made me vulnerable to manipulation. They were about to discover that a woman who had built a successful real estate portfolio through decades of careful planning and legal knowledge wasn't going to lose her home without a fight. The pressure campaign to force me into selling my home intensified over the following weeks with the precision of a military operation. Miranda and David hadn't just stolen my equity and gambled it away. They had positioned themselves as my protectors against my own confusion and poor judgment. The threats escalated from emotional manipulation to legal intimidation. Miranda began floating the idea of involving Adult Protective Services, suggesting that my resistance to selling the house was evidence of severe cognitive decline that put me at risk. "I'm worried about you, Mom," she said during one of her increasingly frequent visits, always accompanied by David as a witness. "You're not thinking clearly about this situation. Maybe we need to get some professionals involved to help you understand what's best for everyone." The subtext was clear. If I didn't voluntarily surrender my home to pay for her gambling debts, she would have me declared mentally incompetent and take it anyway. David reinforced this threat with his own brand of patronizing concern. "Mom, we love you, but you're not processing this information rationally. The mortgage is real, the debt is real, and the house needs to be sold. Fighting against reality isn't healthy at your age." Miranda had also begun a subtle social media campaign designed to paint me as a difficult, stubborn elderly person who was refusing help from her caring family. Her posts were carefully crafted to seem sympathetic while implying that I was becoming a burden. Dealing with some family challenges right now, read one typical post. Sometimes our elderly loved ones have trouble accepting help even when it's clearly in their best interest. Prayers appreciated as we navigate this difficult situation. The responses from her friends were predictably supportive of her and pitying toward me. You're such a good daughter for taking care of her. It's so hard when they start to lose their independence. Maybe it's time to consider assisted living. Each comment felt like another nail in the coffin of my reputation and autonomy. It was during this systematic campaign of psychological warfare that I began to piece together the true scope of Miranda's betrayal. The foreclosure notice had been just the beginning. As I reviewed my financial records more carefully, I discovered other irregularities that painted a picture of systematic identity theft and fraud. There were credit inquiries I'd never authorized, utility accounts opened in my name for properties I didn't own, and even attempts to access my investment accounts using forged identification. Miranda hadn't just stolen $150,000 through the fraudulent mortgage. She had been systematically attempting to drain every asset I owned. The profound agony of this calculated exploitation hit me with overwhelming clarity. This wasn't a desperate mistake made in a moment of poor judgment. This was a methodical campaign to steal my entire life savings, orchestrated by someone who had intimate knowledge of my financial situation because I had trusted her completely. But the most devastating realization came when I confronted the true scope of my own past sacrifices for Miranda, sacrifices that made her current betrayal almost unbearable to contemplate. The memories I'd tried to suppress for over 20 years came flooding back with crystal clarity. When Miranda was 22, she'd been involved in a hit-and-run accident that had seriously injured a child. She'd been drinking, she'd panicked, and she'd fled the scene. When the police investigation began closing in on her, she'd come to me in tears, begging for help. I'd saved her. Using my real estate connections and my financial resources, I'd hired the best criminal defense attorney money could buy. I'd paid over $100,000 in legal fees, investigative costs, and a substantial out-of-court settlement to the injured child's family. Most importantly, I'd used my own professional reputation to create an alibi for Miranda, convincing a business associate to say she'd been in a meeting with me at the time of the accident. Miranda had avoided prison, avoided a criminal record, and had been able to build the life she now enjoyed because I had sacrificed my integrity and my savings to protect her. For 20 years, I'd carried the weight of that lie, watching her succeed professionally and personally, while knowing that her freedom had been bought with my money and my compromised ethics. Now, this same daughter was stealing my home and questioning my mental capacity when I resisted her theft. When I tried to hint at the sacrifices I'd made for her over the years, her response was swift and cruel. "Mom, you're always trying to make me feel guilty with your sacrifices," she snapped during one particularly heated argument. "Your past choices are your own business. David says you're trying to manipulate us with guilt and sentimentality instead of facing the reality of this mortgage situation." Reality. I asked, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "The reality is that you stole my home's equity and gambled it away. The reality is that you're asking me to become homeless to pay for your crimes." But Miranda had an answer for that too. "Mom, you're being dramatic. No one's asking you to become homeless. We've found you a beautiful assisted living facility where you'll be safe and cared for." It was then that David presented what they called their solution to the crisis Miranda had created. If I voluntarily sold my home for its full market value of $750,000, they would ensure I receive placement in a premium assisted living facility that cost $9,000 per month. After paying off the mortgage and covering the sales costs, you'll have about $550,000 left, David explained with the patience of someone talking to a confused child. That will cover your care costs for about 5 years, maybe 6 if we're careful with the money. 5 or 6 years. They were offering me 5 or 6 years of institutional living in exchange for a lifetime of careful financial planning and property investment. And after that, I asked. David shrugged. We'll figure something out when the time comes. Maybe Medicaid, maybe family assistance. The important thing is solving the immediate crisis. The immediate crisis that Miranda had created through theft and gambling. But even this wasn't the cruelest part of their solution. They were also demanding that I sign over financial power of attorney to them, supposedly to manage the transition, but really to ensure I could never challenge their decisions or reclaim any assets they might have overlooked. It's just temporary, Miranda assured me with false sincerity. Just until you're settled in your new living situation and we can be sure you're not overwhelmed by financial stress. Temporary, like the temporary second mortgage that was now threatening to destroy my life. That evening, I sat in my garden looking at the home I'd worked so hard to pay off, and I felt the full weight of my family's betrayal. They weren't trying to help me manage a difficult situation. They were systematically stealing everything I owned while positioning themselves as my concerned caregivers. They had underestimated the depth of my knowledge about property law and financial fraud. More importantly, they had underestimated my determination to fight for what was mine. But I had documentation they didn't know about, evidence they couldn't access, and allies they'd never suspected. The real battle for my home and my dignity was about to begin. The final assault on my independence came exactly 1 week after I definitively rejected their assisted living solution. I should have known they wouldn't wait for my voluntary cooperation. The convoy of vehicles arrived at my home on a Thursday morning, led by David's pickup truck, followed by a moving van and an official-looking sedan. When the occupants emerged, I saw the scope of what they'd planned. Miranda and David, of course, but also Mr. Jenkins, with his briefcase full of legal documents, and a team of professional movers who began unloading boxes and equipment. "Mom," Miranda announced without any preliminary greeting, "it's time for your transition. We've arranged everything for your move to Sunset Manor. They have a lovely room ready for you, and all the arrangements have been made." I backed away from them, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and rage. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home, and I'm not leaving. Mr. Jenkins stepped forward with his clipboard and his practiced bureaucratic demeanor. Mrs. Patterson, the foreclosure has been finalized due to non-payment of the mortgage debt. The property is being seized today to satisfy the outstanding loan balance. All personal property needs to be removed immediately. But this foreclosure is based on fraud, I protested. I never signed for any mortgage. "Ma'am," Mr. Jenkins replied with the patience reserved for difficult elderly people, "we've been through this. The documentation is proper and legal. Your signature was verified at the time of the loan origination. If you're experiencing memory issues about the transaction, that's unfortunate, but it doesn't affect the legal validity of the mortgage." The movers began their work with efficient ruthlessness, loading my precious real estate investment journals, my meticulously kept property deeds, and my personal photo albums into boxes marked storage. They treated these irreplaceable records of my life's work like ordinary household goods, showing no understanding of their importance to my professional identity and financial security. "Please be careful with those," I cried, watching them pack away 40 years of documented real estate success. Those files contain proprietary investment strategies and property records. One of the movers looked at me with pity. "Don't worry, ma'am. Everything's going to a secure storage facility. You can visit your things whenever you want." But I knew that wasn't true. Once they had me institutionalized and declared mentally incompetent, I'd never see these documents again. They'd disappear into storage, and eventually, when the storage fees went unpaid, they'd be destroyed or sold to strangers. As they prepared to escort me to their van, I made one final desperate appeal to David. Throughout this entire nightmare, he'd been the one family member I'd hoped might retain some sense of decency or loyalty. "David, please don't do this to me," I begged, reaching out to touch his arm. "This is my home, our family's home. You know my mind is clear. You know I never signed for any mortgage. Don't let them destroy everything I've worked for." For just a moment, I saw something flicker in David's eyes, guilt perhaps, or regret. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again when Miranda shot him a warning look. "I'm sorry, Mom." He whispered, tears streaming down his face, but he didn't move to stop what was happening. "They say this is what's best for everyone. The debt has to be paid somehow." In that agonizing moment, I understood the complete scope of the betrayal. David wasn't just allowing this to happen, he was complicit in it. My son-in-law, who had lived rent-free in my property for 2 years, who had benefited from my generosity and kindness, was actively participating in my destruction. As they loaded me into the transport van, I caught sight of my grandchildren watching from the driveway. Ethan and Chloe stood with their arms across their faces, showing not sympathy, but impatience with the drama I was supposedly creating. "Why don't you just go quietly?" Ethan called out with teenage cruelty. "Your old house is a dump anyway. The new place will be much better for someone your age." Chloe giggled at her brother's comment. "Yeah, Grandma, stop being so dramatic. It's not like you're dying or anything." The casual dismissal of my suffering by my own grandchildren felt like the final nail in my emotional coffin. Miranda's text message, which I would see later, perfectly captured the coldness of their victory. "Consider this closed, Mom. You lose. Don't contact us again. Ever. You're causing too much trouble with your craziness." Sunset Manor was exactly what I'd expected, sterile, institutional, and designed to warehouse the elderly rather than care for them. My room was small and cheerless, with a narrow bed, a single chair, and a view of the parking lot. My phone was confiscated for my safety, and I was told that all communications would need to be approved by my responsible party, Miranda. It was in this sterile environment, stripped of everything that had given my life meaning, that I finally confronted the most devastating secret I'd carried for nearly 50 years. The truth I'd hidden about Miranda wasn't just about the hit-and-run accident I'd helped her cover up. It was something even more fundamental, something that made her current betrayal feel like the cruelest possible cosmic joke. Miranda wasn't my biological daughter. The revelation had come to me gradually through my obsessive record-keeping and attention to detail that had served me so well in real estate. When Miranda was in her 20s, I'd been helping her with a passport application that required her original birth certificate. The document that arrived from the hospital had contained a small discrepancy, a notation about a correction made to the original filing. My investigation into that discrepancy had uncovered the truth. There had been a mix-up in the hospital nursery the day Miranda was born. 2 babies, born within hours of each other to mothers with similar names, had been accidentally switched. The mistake hadn't been discovered until weeks later, and by then both families had bonded with the children they believed were theirs. The hospital administration had made a decision to cover up the error rather than traumatize two families by forcing them to exchange children. They'd falsified records, destroyed evidence, and sworn the few staff members who knew to secrecy. I'd learned all of this through months of private investigation, hiring investigators and legal experts to piece together the truth. But when I'd finally confirmed what had happened, I'd made a choice that had defined the rest of my life. I'd chosen to keep the secret. Miranda was thriving in our family. She was healthy, happy, and loved. Her biological parents, whom I'd discreetly observed, were struggling financially and emotionally. Disrupting her life to satisfy some abstract notion of biological truth would have hurt everyone involved. So I'd buried the truth, destroyed my copies of the evidence, and spent the next 25 years loving Miranda as completely as if she'd been born to me. Every sacrifice I'd made for her, every financial support I'd provided, every time I'd protected her from the consequences of her actions had been motivated by my desperate desire to prove that love was stronger than biology. Now, as I sat in this institutional room, financially ruined and emotionally destroyed by Miranda's betrayal, the cosmic irony was overwhelming. The daughter I'd chosen to love unconditionally, whose very presence in my life was the result of my decision to prioritize love over truth, had repaid that love by stealing my home and having me declared incompetent. But even in this moment of complete despair, I held on to one crucial fact. My security cameras had captured everything. Somewhere in the storage facility where my belongings had been taken were the recorded conversations that would prove Miranda's guilt and Mr. Jenkins's corruption. They thought they'd successfully erased me from my own life, convinced the world I was a confused old woman who couldn't remember her own financial transactions. They didn't know about the evidence I'd been quietly gathering for months. They didn't know about my forensic document examiner ally who was already analyzing the forged signatures. And they certainly didn't understand that a woman who had spent her career documenting property ownership and protecting her assets wasn't going to lose everything without exposing the truth. The real fight for my home, my dignity, and my legacy was about to begin. Life at Sunset Manor was designed to strip away every vestige of the successful, competent woman I'd once been. The facility operated under the guise of compassionate elder care, but I quickly discovered it was actually a sophisticated system of psychological control, made even more insidious by Miranda and David's generous donations and Dr. Smith's fabricated reports about my condition. Every morning began with what they called cognitive assessments, humiliating rituals where staff members would ask me basic questions as if testing my mental capacity. What's your name, dear? What year is it? Do you remember why you're here? The condescending tone, the way they spoke to me as if I were a confused child, was deliberately designed to make me question my own mental clarity. When I tried to discuss my background as a real estate investor, to explain the legal principles behind property ownership and mortgage fraud that I'd mastered over 4 decades, the staff would exchange knowing glances and make notes on their clipboards. You're a resident now, dear, not a market expert, one nurse said with patronizing kindness. Let's focus on today's activities instead of these old business stories. My attempts to discuss real estate trends or analyze legal documents were met with swift intervention. We don't want you to get agitated about financial matters, Mrs. Patterson, they would say, taking away any paper I tried to examine. Why don't you try some nice jigsaw puzzles instead? Much more appropriate for your current situation. The phrase, your current situation, followed me everywhere like a toxic cloud. They never specified exactly what my condition was, but it was referenced constantly as if everyone understood that I was fundamentally impaired in ways that made my expertise and experience irrelevant. The most devastating psychological torture came during the supervised visits from my grandchildren. Miranda and David would bring Ethan and Chloe for brief, highly orchestrated encounters that felt more like staged performances designed to document my decline than genuine family visits. Ethan, now 16 and clearly coached beforehand, would ask leading questions designed to make me sound confused. "Grandma, do you remember who I am?" He'd ask, his voice artificially gentle, while Miranda recorded the interaction on her phone. "Do you remember teaching me about compound interest when I was little?" The questions were crafted to make me sound delusional if I mentioned the truth about the forged mortgage, or disoriented if I couldn't perfectly recall every detail of our past conversations about investing. When I tried to appeal to Ethan's memories of the financial lessons I'd taught him, his responses were carefully scripted. "I remember you being different then, Grandma," he'd say, with practiced sadness. But Mom and Dad explained that sometimes older people get confused about money and start imagining things that didn't really happen. Chloe's visits were even more heartbreaking. At 14, she would bring me comfort items, large print word search books, soft blankets, simple photo albums meant for someone with severe cognitive impairment. During one particularly cruel visit, Ethan showed me photographs on his phone, swiping through images that made my heart stop. "Look, Grandma," he said, showing me a picture of himself and Miranda standing in front of my beloved home holding a large sold sign. "Mom says you don't need to worry about the old house anymore because you have everything you need here." The visual assault of seeing my life's work being celebrated as a successful sale presented by my own grandson as a positive development was almost more than I could bear. I felt my heart physically ache as I watched him scroll through pictures of strangers touring my home, his face bright with excitement about the fresh start his mother was creating. But the cruelest blow came when Miranda announced the sale of my home on social media with triumphant celebration. Her posts showed before and after renderings. The before photos depicting my carefully maintained property as outdated and too much house for one person, while the after images showed plans for modern renovations that would strip away every personal touch I'd lovingly added over the decades. "So excited about this new chapter," she wrote, accompanying the post with photos of herself and David holding the sales contract showing $750,000. Sometimes, progress means letting go of outdated attachments and embracing modern efficiency. Can't wait to see what the new owners do with this underutilized space. The comments on her posts were filled with congratulations and praise for their wise financial decision and smart approach to elder care. People who had never known the true story were celebrating the destruction of my life's sanctuary as if it were a victory for sensible family planning. Meanwhile, my financial situation grew more desperate by the day. I discovered that Miranda, using her court-appointed guardianship powers, had not only taken control of my remaining bank accounts, but had also diverted my pension payments and revoked my access to any funds. When I tried to contact my own attorney, I was told that all legal communications had to go through Mr. Jenkins, who was now handling my legal affairs. The facility staff made my helplessness clear in their casual conversations, which I was obviously meant to overhear. "She's a high-maintenance resident," one aide complained to another. "Family never visits except for those quick check-ins with the kids. Makes you wonder what she did to alienate them so completely." These words cut deep because they reinforced the narrative that I was the problem that my family's systematic abuse was somehow justified by my own failures rather than their calculated greed. Just when despair threatened to consume me completely, an unexpected source of hope appeared. Sarah, a young aide who worked the evening shift, had been watching my situation with growing concern. Unlike the other staff members, she seemed to recognize that there was something fundamentally wrong with how I was being treated. One evening, as she was helping me prepare for bed, she quietly slipped something into my hands, a small, worn property law textbook that someone had left in the facility's community room. "I thought you might like this," she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. "I noticed you looking sad when the other residents talk about their homes, and someone told me you used to work in real estate." Later, alone in my room, I opened the textbook and found something that made my heart skip a beat. Tucked inside the back cover in handwriting I recognized was a tiny, almost invisible inscription, "Eleanor's help." Eleanor, my trusted colleague of 20 years, who had worked alongside me on countless property transactions and had always respected my expertise and integrity. Eleanor, who understood property law better than anyone and who would immediately recognize the signs of mortgage fraud. The inscription could only mean one thing: Eleanor was somehow aware of my situation and was trying to communicate that help was available. More importantly, it meant that somewhere out there, someone with professional credibility and legal knowledge was working to expose the truth about Miranda's systematic fraud. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of genuine hope. I wasn't completely abandoned. Someone who understood the intricacies of real estate law and document authentication was still fighting for justice, and somewhere out there, the security camera footage that would prove Miranda's guilt was waiting to be revealed. That night, I lay in my narrow institutional bed, clutching the textbook like a lifeline. They thought they'd successfully gaslighted me into questioning my own sanity, convinced the world I was mentally incompetent, and erased all evidence of my professional competence. They didn't know about Eleanor. They didn't know about Sarah's kindness, and they certainly didn't understand the determination of a woman who had spent her life understanding the legal complexities of property ownership and fraud prevention. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. 8 months into my imprisonment at Sunset Manor, Miranda unveiled her masterpiece of public manipulation, a highly publicized national generational wealth and responsible investing seminar that would forever poison my professional legacy while celebrating her theft as visionary financial planning. The event was planned with the precision of a corporate product launch. Major financial publications received press releases touting Miranda as a breakthrough expert in family asset management and a pioneering voice in responsible wealth transfer who had successfully modernized traditional investment approaches. The seminar was scheduled for a weekend at the Grand Financial Center downtown, complete with professional lighting, multiple camera crews, and a live stream that would reach thousands of viewers in the investment community. Miranda had somehow positioned herself as the keynote speaker, and I learned from overheard staff conversations that she'd been promoting the event as a case study in intelligent estate planning. Most sickeningly, Miranda had based her entire presentation on my meticulously maintained investment records, the portfolios and financial strategies that had been confiscated from my home and supposedly sent to storage. She'd taken 40 years of my careful property analysis, my market research, and my investment philosophy, and she was presenting them as examples of overly cautious, fear-based investment strategies that modern families needed to reject. I learned about the event The way I learned about everything involving my stolen life now through the casual cruelty of staff members who thought I was too mentally impaired to understand what they were discussing. Did you see that investment conference on the Business Channel? One aide said to another during the shift change. The young woman talking about modernizing family wealth management. Her mother is one of our residents. Sad how the older generation just can't adapt to dynamic investment strategies. The live stream was playing in the common room when I managed to slip in during the afternoon. What I saw was a calculated dismantling of everything I dedicated my career to building. Miranda stood at a podium wearing an expensive suit that my stolen home equity had undoubtedly paid for, speaking to a crowd of several hundred financial professionals about her innovative approach to liberating family wealth from generational, fear-based decision-making. Too often, she said, her voice carrying across the room with practiced authority, we allow outdated risk aversion to prevent optimal wealth generation. My mother's generation was obsessed with safe, conservative investments, living in constant fear of market volatility. But what if that excessive caution was actually preventing our families from achieving true financial freedom? She clicked through PowerPoint slides that I recognized as digitized versions of my own investment analyses and property portfolios. But she'd manipulated the data, taking my careful documentation of long-term wealth-building strategies and presenting them as evidence of investment stagnation and opportunity aversion. Look at this example, she said, pointing to a chart that showed my methodical property acquisition strategy. My mother spent 30 years building a real estate portfolio that generated only modest returns because she was too afraid to leverage debt or explore growth opportunities. She was so attached to safe investments that she couldn't see how her emotional attachment to security was preventing real prosperity. The audience murmured with sympathetic understanding. These people didn't know that my emotional attachment to security had protected our family through multiple market crashes and had built the very wealth that Miranda was now using to fund her lifestyle. They saw only conservative returns and missed opportunities for aggressive growth. David spoke next, his presentation focusing on the modernization breakthrough that had occurred once they'd updated my investment approach. He'd hired graphic designers to create beautiful slides showing the difference between fear-based conservative investing and strategic growth-oriented asset management. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is freedom from our own financial trauma, he said, looking directly into the camera with practiced sincerity. Evelyn created a solid foundation, but she was stuck in outdated thinking that prioritized preservation over growth. Our success came from honoring her conservative instincts while adapting them for contemporary wealth-building opportunities. Honoring my conservative instincts. He was using the language of respect and gratitude to justify stealing my life's work and gambling it away on cryptocurrency. But the most devastating moment came when they played pre-recorded video messages from my grandchildren. Ethan, now 16, and looking heartbreakingly like his grandfather, spoke directly to the camera with the same practiced sincerity I'd seen during his visits to the facility. I'm grateful my family taught me to think about investments strategically rather than emotionally, he said, standing in what I recognized as my former home office, now completely renovated with modern equipment. My grandmother always wanted us to learn about money management, but she was stuck in old ways of thinking. Now I understand that real wealth building means taking calculated risks rather than hiding money in safe but low-growth investments. The words were clearly scripted, but Ethan delivered them with conviction. This was the boy I'd taught about compound interest and property appreciation, who used to help me research market trends and calculate return on investment. Now he was publicly rejecting everything I tried to teach him about the importance of financial security and sustainable growth. Chloe's segment was shorter, but equally painful. The 14-year-old appeared in what was clearly a professionally produced segment, giggling as she held up one of my handwritten ledger books. "Grandma used to track everything by hand," she said, with manufactured enthusiasm. "So slow and old-fashioned. We prefer digital analysis and quick profit opportunities. This is like using a calculator when you have a computer." The casual dismissal of my meticulous record-keeping as obsolete technology, the reduction of decades of financial expertise to inefficient nostalgia, felt like watching my professional grave being dug in real time. As the seminar concluded, with Miranda receiving enthusiastic applause for her courage in modernizing traditional family wealth management, I collapsed in my chair in the common room, my body shaking with rage and despair, so profound I couldn't catch my breath. But even in that moment of absolute professional devastation, something unexpected happened. As the live stream ended and the staff began changing channels, I heard one of them mention something that pierced through my grief like a ray of light. "You know," Sarah said quietly to another aide, "there was a woman calling earlier asking about Mrs. Patterson, said she was a retired real estate attorney who'd worked with her for years and was concerned about some of the investment information being presented at that conference." A retired real estate attorney who understood that something was fundamentally wrong with Miranda's presentation. Someone from my professional past who recognized that the overly cautious, fear-based investing being mocked was actually sound financial planning being deliberately misrepresented. It could only be Margaret Walsh, the real estate attorney, who'd handled many of my property transactions over the years. Margaret, who understood the legal complexities of property ownership and the importance of conservative, sustainable investment strategies. If Margaret was watching, if she was questioning what she'd seen, then maybe the professional community I'd served for so long wasn't completely convinced by Miranda and David's narrative of my obsolescence. For the first time since being imprisoned in this facility, I felt something other than despair. I felt the stirring of hope and the beginning of understanding that my life's work had touched people who might be willing to fight for the truth. They thought they'd destroyed my professional credibility, turned my expertise into a cautionary tale, and successfully buried my legacy under their manufactured narrative of my technological incompetence. They didn't know that truth has a way of surfacing, especially when it's been buried by people who don't understand the difference between sound financial planning and reckless speculation. The final phase of my destruction began exactly 2 weeks after Miranda's investment seminar, as if the public celebration of my stolen expertise had been the signal for them to deliver the killing blow to any hope I might have retained for justice or dignity. The lawsuit documents arrived at Sunset Manor on a Monday morning, delivered not to me, but to the facility administrator, another reminder that I was no longer considered competent to handle my own legal affairs. The thick manila envelope contained a complaint that would have been laughable if it weren't so devastatingly effective. Miranda was suing me for $1.5 million. According to the meticulously crafted legal document, my harassment and false accusations regarding the mortgage fraud had caused Miranda severe emotional distress and damaged her emerging reputation as a financial advisor. My erratic behavior and public defamation had interfered with her business relationships. Most grotesquely, the lawsuit claimed that my obsessive attachment to outdated investment methods and paranoid accusations about property ownership had created a hostile family environment that had negatively impacted her mental health and professional development. Every word was a carefully constructed lie, but lies wrapped in legal language and filed in official court documents carry weight that truth spoken by a woman in an assisted living facility cannot match. The message was clear: even if I somehow found a way to challenge their theft, the cost of defending myself against this frivolous lawsuit would consume whatever resources I might have left. But Miranda wasn't finished with her financial assault. Using connections she'd made through her seminar appearances and David's business network, she simultaneously launched attacks on every remaining source of income or professional recognition I might have had. She contacted the National Association of Real Estate Investors, where I'd been a respected member for 25 years, filing formal complaints about my professional conduct, using Dr. Smith's fabricated medical reports as evidence. She claimed that my cognitive decline had been developing for years, calling into question the validity of all my previous investment advice. We have serious concerns about Mrs. Patterson's mental competence during her final years of active investing, her letter to the association stated. There are questions about whether her investment strategies met current fiduciary standards and whether her certifications should be revoked retroactively for potential client endangerment. The response was swift and devastating. Within 3 weeks, I received a letter informing me that my professional certifications were being revoked, my membership in the association was terminated, and my pension payments were permanently suspended, pending a full investigation into allegations of inappropriate investment practices and professional misconduct. 40 years of successful property investment, thousands of satisfied clients, decades of conservative wealth-building strategies that had protected families through multiple market downturns, all of it dismissed and invalidated, based on the lies of a daughter who had stolen my home equity and was now using my professional destruction to cover her tracks. The loss of my pension meant I could no longer afford even the basic care at Sunset Manor. The facility administrator, Mrs. Rodriguez, called me into her office with obvious discomfort to explain my transition options. Mrs. Patterson, I'm afraid your family has indicated they can no longer cover the costs of your care here, she said, avoiding my eyes. We'll need to arrange for your transfer to county care until your legal situation is resolved. County care, the warehouse-style nursing facility where indigent elderly people were stored until they died, a place I'd heard horror stories about from other residents. But even this wasn't the depth of their cruelty. The eviction from Sunset Manor had been perfectly timed to maximize my humiliation. David had somehow learned that my pension suspension would force me out of the facility, and he'd arranged for local media to be present as my remaining possessions were loaded into garbage bags. The news story that aired that evening showed me as a pitiful figure, a confused old woman being moved from private care to appropriate county facilities due to family financial constraints and ongoing legal issues. The reporter interviewed David on camera, and his performance was masterful. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you love struggle with these kinds of accusations and paranoid thinking, he said, standing in front of the investment firm where he now worked using credentials partly based on my stolen portfolio data. We tried everything we could to help Evelyn maintain appropriate care, but sometimes you have to make realistic decisions about what's financially sustainable when someone becomes difficult. Standing beside him, Miranda nodded gravely. We want what's best for everyone, she said. Sometimes that means accepting difficult realities about aging and mental health issues. They looked like concerned family members making painful but necessary decisions about an elderly relative's care. The viewing public saw only their composed explanations and footage of me being transferred to county care. No one questioned their narrative or wondered why a successful investor had suddenly become destitute and paranoid. But the cruelest display of their triumph was yet to come. Crypto King. Miranda's online gambling associate and the apparent beneficiary of my stolen mortgage money made a highly publicized purchase that felt like a deliberate slap in my face. Using proceeds that could only have come from my $150,000 mortgage and the $750,000 from my home sale, he bought a massive custom-built cryptocurrency mining operation and an expensive yacht for offshore investments. The dedication ceremony was covered extensively in tech and investment media, with Crypto King and Miranda speaking about their partnership in innovative wealth generation and their commitment to next-generation investment strategies. My partner Miranda taught me that sometimes the greatest innovations come from having the courage to move beyond traditional family limitations. Crypto King told the gathered crowd with practiced sincerity. This mining facility represents everything she learned about transforming conservative assets into dynamic growth opportunities. The irony was sickening. He was using money stolen from my life savings to fund a memorial to my supposed investment shortcomings, while I was literally homeless and destitute because of their theft. Meanwhile, Miranda and David had made it clear that my suffering was simply not their concern. I have no legal obligation to support her beyond what we've already provided, David told a local reporter who had asked about family assistance. She made her own financial decisions, and now she has to live with the consequences. Miranda was even more devastating in her dismissal. Her social media posts during this time showed her busy, successful life business conferences, vacation photos, celebrations of her investment successes, with not a single mention of my situation. So grateful for this productive time in our lives. Read one particularly cruel post. Sometimes you have to focus on moving forward rather than getting dragged down by people who refuse to accept help or adapt to changing circumstances. The stress of losing everything: my home, my income, my professional reputation, my family relationships, while watching my tormentors be praised for their supposed innovation and generosity, proved too much for my 69-year-old body to handle. The stroke came while I was sitting in the county facility's day room watching the local news coverage of Crypto King's mining facility dedication. One moment, I was listening to Miranda speak about my legacy of conservative investment wisdom being adapted for contemporary needs. And the next, I was on the floor, my vision going dark as nurses rushed to help. I woke up in the county hospital's emergency ward connected to machines that monitored every function of my damaged brain. The neurologist Dr. Chen explained that I'd suffered a significant stroke brought on by severe stress and that my cognitive function might be permanently impaired. "You're fortunate to be alive," she said gently. "Your brain was under tremendous strain. The combination of emotional trauma and financial stress can be just as dangerous as any physical threat." As I lay in that hospital bed, barely able to speak and partially paralyzed on my left side, my mind drifted in and out of consciousness. In those hazy moments between sleep and waking, I found myself remembering a conversation with my late husband that had haunted me for decades. I could see him clearly in my memory, sitting at our kitchen table late one night, surrounded by financial documents he was trying to hide from Miranda and David. He'd confessed to me about a speculative investment he'd made years earlier $50,000 in a risky venture that had failed completely, creating debt that had taken us years to recover from. Evelyn, his voice echoed in my memory. I need to tell you something about that investment loss from '92. I never told the kids how close we came to losing everything because of my gambling on that tech startup. I was so ashamed of my recklessness. In my dream state, I realized that Miranda's current gambling addiction wasn't an anomaly. It was a pattern that had been in our family for decades. Her father had nearly destroyed us with speculative investing, and I'd spent years quietly rebuilding our financial security while protecting his reputation and shielding our children from the truth about his recklessness. Now, 30 years later, Miranda was repeating her father's mistakes on a much larger scale and using my poverty caused by her theft of my assets as evidence that I was incompetent with money. The realization was both devastating and energizing. I wasn't just a confused old woman being victimized by greedy family members. I was experiencing a multi-generational pattern of financial recklessness and cover-ups executed by people who had been the beneficiaries of my financial responsibility their entire lives. They thought they destroyed my ability to think clearly, but my stroke had actually crystallized my understanding of the deeper pattern of financial manipulation that had defined our family's history. As my strength slowly returned, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began: the clarity that comes from recognizing a familiar pattern and understanding that there are proven ways to fight back. They thought they'd silenced me permanently. They were about to discover that a woman who'd spent her career building wealth through careful documentation and legal compliance had just remembered every lesson she'd ever learned about exposing fraud and protecting assets. My recovery from the stroke was slow and frustrating, but it was also clarifying in ways I hadn't expected. Lying in that hospital bed with my left side partially paralyzed and my speech slurred, I felt the fragmented pieces of my professional knowledge reassembling into a coherent understanding of the systematic fraud I was experiencing. Dr. Chen had been honest about my prognosis. The stress-induced stroke had caused significant damage, and while I might recover enough to communicate effectively again, I would never be the same physically robust woman I'd once been. But what she didn't understand was that my physical weakness was being matched by a growing mental clarity about the patterns of financial manipulation I was witnessing. It was during my third week in the stroke rehabilitation unit that I made the decision to record what might be my final testimony. With the help of a compassionate nurse named Janet, who had been horrified by my story and had witnessed the complete absence of family visits during my hospitalization, I managed to create a video message using her personal tablet. The recording was raw and unfiltered. Sitting propped up in my hospital bed, still connected to monitoring equipment, I spoke directly to the camera with the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything important to say. My name is Evelyn Patterson, and I may not have much time left to tell the truth about the systematic theft that has destroyed my life and stolen my family's financial security. I began my voice steady despite my physical limitations. I played the audio recordings I'd secretly made during those first devastating confrontations with Miranda recordings I'd managed to create using my phone's voice memo function when I'd sensed something was wrong with her increasingly desperate requests for financial help. Miranda's voice came through clearly revealing the calculated nature of her manipulation. Mom's house is worth so much more than she realizes, her recorded voice declared in a conversation I'd captured when she thought I was sleeping. Once I get access to that equity through the mortgage, I can turn this crypto situation around and we'll all be rich. She'll thank me for being smart about leveraging our family assets. In the video, I also carefully revealed my professional background and expertise, explaining how my 40 years of building a real estate portfolio had trained me to recognize property fraud and document ownership issues, skills that had allowed me to spot the irregularities in the mortgage documents immediately. Most importantly, I shared my documentation of Miranda's systematic theft and David's complicity in erasing my role as the family's financial foundation. My daughter Miranda isn't a financial innovator, I explained, looking directly into the camera. She's a gambling addict who stole my home equity to fund cryptocurrency speculation, then used fabricated medical reports to have me declared incompetent when I tried to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The recording was devastating in its quiet authority. No screaming, no dramatic accusations, just a stroke survivor telling the truth with documented evidence and professional expertise backing up every claim. Janet helped me prepare the video for delivery to Miranda, with copies sent to local media and the district attorney's office. My plan was simple: give Miranda one last chance to do the right thing, to choose truth over continued deception, to remember that I was her mother rather than just an obstacle to her financial goals. But I had underestimated Mr. Jenkins's paranoia and his network of corrupted allies throughout the healthcare and legal systems. Through methods I would later discover involved bribing hospital staff and monitoring my communications, Mr. Jenkins intercepted my video message before it could reach Miranda or any legitimate authorities. The same network that had helped him facilitate the fraudulent mortgage and manipulate my medical records now gave him advance warning of my attempt to expose the truth. What Mr. Jenkins did next revealed the true depth of his cunning and his complete absence of moral boundaries. Working with the same video production company that had helped create Miranda's investment seminar presentation, he took my raw, honest testimony and subjected it to sophisticated digital manipulation that transformed it into something unrecognizable. He altered the audio to make my post-stroke speech sound even more slurred and confused, inserted long pauses that suggested severe cognitive impairment, and spliced together sentences to create statements I'd never made. Most insidiously, he completely removed the audio evidence of Miranda's own damning statements, replacing them with distorted noise that he claimed was unintelligible rambling, proving my mental deterioration. My professional credentials and documented evidence were edited to make them sound like paranoid fantasies about imaginary property ownership and delusional investment claims. The final product bore no resemblance to my original message. Instead of a stroke survivor's truthful testimony, it appeared to be the delusional rantings of someone suffering from severe dementia, possibly complicated by the neurological effects of my recent stroke. Mr. Jenkins then sold this fabricated video to Family Property Network, a tabloid television show that specialized in exploiting family real estate disputes for entertainment value. He presented himself as a concerned loan officer trying to help a deeply disturbed elderly woman who was harassing her family with increasingly bizarre accusations. The segment aired on a Thursday evening, reaching millions of viewers across the country. The host introduced it with breathless sensationalism that made my suffering into entertainment. Tonight, a heartbreaking investigation into a family torn apart by dementia delusion and an elderly woman's desperate attempt to destroy her own daughter's financial success with false accusations of mortgage fraud and property theft. The doctored video was presented as definitive evidence of my rapid cognitive decline following my stroke and my cruel attempts to blame family members for her own financial mismanagement. expert commentary from a geriatric psychiatrist who had never met me analyzed my paranoid ideation and grandiose delusions about real estate expertise. But the cruelest blow came when Miranda and David appeared for a live interview immediately following the segment. Dressed in somber clothing and looking every inch the grieving family members, they spoke with practiced emotion about my tragic decline and their heartbreak at watching me slip away from reality. It's devastating to see someone you love become so consumed by paranoia and anger. Miranda said, her voice catching with what seemed like genuine emotion. Mom was always so sharp with numbers and property investments, but since her stroke, she's become convinced that everyone is conspiring against her. The accusations she's making, they're not only false, they're deeply hurtful to our family's healing process. David, sitting beside her with tears in his eyes, added his own devastating testimony. We've tried everything to help Evelyn, but she rejects every attempt at support. She's created this elaborate fantasy where we're all villains in some conspiracy to steal from her, when the truth is, we're just trying to manage her care expenses and keep her safe. The interviewer leaned forward with feigned sympathy. This must be incredibly difficult for your children as well. It is, Miranda nodded gravely. Ethan is here with us tonight because he wanted people to understand how this has affected our family. The camera panned to show Ethan sitting beside his mother, looking mature and thoughtful beyond his 16 years. When asked about his grandmother's behavior, he spoke with carefully coached sincerity that broke my heart completely. I love Grandma Evelyn, he said, his young voice steady and convincing. But since her stroke, she's been saying things that aren't true, making accusations against people who are just trying to help her. It's scary sometimes, and we just want her to get the help she needs so she can be peaceful again. The performance was flawless. Miranda, David, and Ethan came across as a loving family trying to cope with a difficult, mentally compromised relative. I was portrayed as a tragic figure whose illness had transformed me from a beloved family member into a source of pain and false accusations. The segment ended with Miranda making a public plea for privacy during this difficult time, while expressing hope that I would accept the professional help being offered and find peace in whatever time I have left. Within hours, the story had gone viral on social media. My name became associated with cautionary tales about stroke-related dementia, family real estate disputes, and the dangers of allowing elderly relatives with cognitive impairment to make false accusations. Comment sections filled with armchair diagnoses and expressions of sympathy for my poor family, who were dealing with such a heartbreaking situation. The complete character assassination was so thorough, so professionally executed, that even I might have believed it if I hadn't been living the truth. Watching myself portrayed as a delusional, paranoid woman making false accusations against loving family members was like watching my own funeral while still being alive to witness it. But even in that moment of utter defeat, when it seemed that truth itself had been murdered and buried along with my reputation, I held on to one crucial fact. Somewhere out there, Margaret Walsh had seen Miranda's investment presentation and had recognized the systematic fraud for what it was. And there were people, Eleanor, Janet, others in the professional community who had known me for decades, who might recognize that the woman in that twisted video wasn't the Evelyn Patterson they had known and respected. They thought they had silenced me forever, turned my own voice into a weapon against me, and convinced the world that I was everything they claimed I was. They thought my stroke had made me helpless, my age had made me irrelevant, and my isolation had made me powerless. They were about to discover that truth has allies they never suspected, and that some fights are too important to abandon, even when defeat seems certain. The miracle I'd been hoping for came from an unexpected source, a forgotten emergency travel fund I'd maintained in a separate bank account that Miranda had never discovered. The $75,000 I'd set aside for just-in-case situations would now fund the most important fight of my life. 6 months after my national humiliation, as I lay recovering in the county hospital's rehabilitation ward, I received visits that would change everything. First came Margaret Walsh, the veteran real estate attorney who had recognized the fraud in Miranda's investment presentation. Behind her was Dr. Richard Stone, a renowned forensic document examiner who specialized in mortgage fraud cases. Finally, there was Sarah Martinez, an aggressive elder abuse prosecutor who had volunteered to take on my case after seeing the manipulated video. "Mrs. Patterson," Margaret said, taking my hand, "we've been investigating your situation since that horrible investment seminar. What they've done to you isn't just criminal, it's an assault on everything that honest property ownership represents." Dr. Stone explained that he'd already begun analyzing the forged mortgage documents. "The signature analysis alone is damning," he said quietly. "But we have something even better. Eleanor managed to retrieve your security camera system's backup files before they were destroyed. The federal lawsuit we filed was comprehensive and devastating. Miranda David and Mr. Jenkins were charged with elder abuse, mortgage fraud, conspiracy forgery, and defamation. The charges carried serious prison time and massive financial penalties. Most importantly, the case attracted global attention, partly because of the viral video that had destroyed my reputation, and partly because it represented a perfect example of how family members could systematically exploit elderly relatives' property assets. The trial began on a crisp November morning, with media trucks lined up outside the federal courthouse and crowds of spectators hoping to witness what the press had dubbed the case of the secret mortgage. I sat in the front row, wearing the pearl necklace my late husband had given me for our 25th anniversary, my hands steady for the first time in years. Miranda David and Mr. Jenkins entered with their expensive legal team, still projecting confidence despite the mounting evidence against them. They'd hired corporate attorneys who'd built their defense around my supposed mental instability and their clients' good faith efforts to manage a difficult family situation. That confidence lasted exactly until my legal team began presenting the security camera footage. The courtroom fell silent as the large screen displayed crystal clear video of Miranda sitting at my own kitchen table, repeatedly practicing my signature on blank pieces of paper. The footage was damning in its clarity. There was no mistaking what was happening. "Let me try this angle," Miranda's recorded voice said as she adjusted her pen grip. "I need to make sure the E in Evelyn looks exactly like hers." But it was the audio of Miranda and David's conspiracy planning that truly shattered their facade. The hidden cameras had captured them in my living room, discussing their systematic plan to steal my home equity. "Once we get the $150,000 from the mortgage, I can cover my crypto losses and still have money left over," Miranda's voice explained with chilling calculation. "Mom will never know what hit her until it's too late to stop it." David's response was equally damning. "What if she fights it? What if she tries to prove she didn't sign the documents?" "That's where Mr. Jenkins comes in," Miranda replied with a laugh. "He'll swear he verified her identity personally, and if she keeps causing problems, we'll just have her declared incompetent. Who's going to believe a confused old woman over professional documentation?" The most devastating footage showed them coaching Ethan and Chloe on what to say during their visits to the nursing facility. "Remember," Miranda's voice instructed the children, Grandma isn't thinking clearly anymore. When you visit her, act concerned about her memory. Ask her questions she might not remember perfectly. We need documentation that she's confused and needs our help. But the recording that brought gasps from the courtroom spectators captured Miranda's ultimate cruelty. Honestly, the best thing that could happen is if the old lady would just die already. Then we wouldn't have to deal with all this drama about property ownership. The raw greed and chilling callousness were laid bare before the court and the world. These weren't family members making difficult decisions about an elderly relative's care. These were predators systematically destroying a vulnerable woman while positioning themselves as concerned caregivers. When Mr. Jenkins was called to testify, the transformation was immediate. The confident loan officer who had dismissed my protests was gone. Faced with video evidence of his own participation in the fraud, he broke down completely on the witness stand. I never wanted to hurt anyone. He sobbed, his professional demeanor crumbling. Miranda said it was just helping her family manage their assets. She paid me $5,000 to process the paperwork without asking too many questions. I knew something was wrong, but I needed the money for my own debts. His confession provided the final piece of evidence that exposed the conspiracy in its entirety. When Miranda was called to testify, the confident financial advisor who had charmed investment audiences was nowhere to be seen. Faced with her own recorded words, her own documented cruelty, and the irrefutable evidence of her systematic betrayal, Miranda simply disintegrated. She began stammering, then weeping, then shaking uncontrollably on the witness stand. When the prosecutor asked her to explain her statement about wanting me to just die already, Miranda's composure shattered completely. I didn't mean it like that. She sobbed, her voice breaking. I was just frustrated. I was drowning in debt, and Mom had so much equity in that house. I thought if I could just access some of it, I could fix everything and pay it back before she ever knew. The prosecutor pressed harder. Mrs. Patterson, you stole $150,000 from your mother and had her declared mentally incompetent when she objected. How was that helping your family? Miranda's facade crumbled entirely. I was desperate, she whispered, burying her face in her hands. The crypto losses were so much bigger than I'd told anyone. I thought I could make it all back, but it just kept getting worse. I convinced myself Mom would be better off in care anyway, that this was solving multiple problems at once. The sight of her, this woman who had systematically destroyed my life while positioning herself as a caring daughter, completely broken by her own recorded admissions, was both heartbreaking and vindicating. This wasn't the calculated sociopathy I'd expected. It was the complete moral collapse of someone who had convinced herself her desperation justified destroying the person who loved her most. David's testimony was even more devastating to witness. When he had to listen to his wife's recorded statements about wanting me dead, when he saw her complete psychological breakdown, his own composure collapsed entirely. I thought I was protecting my family's financial future, he said through tears that seemed to come from his very soul. Miranda convinced me that Evelyn was becoming a burden, that she'd want us to be financially secure. I never realized how much we were hurting her. I see now that I wasn't protecting anyone. I was helping destroy the woman who had been nothing but generous to us. When Judge Patricia Harrison read the verdict, finding Miranda David and Mr. Jenkins guilty on all charges, the courtroom erupted in applause. But I felt only a quiet, profound relief. The truth had finally been heard. My voice had been restored, and my professional reputation, built on 40 years of honest real estate investing, had been officially vindicated. Justice had taken 3 years to arrive, but it had arrived completely and publicly. The whole world now knew who the real predators were in this story and who the real victim had been all along. The court's verdict was as comprehensive as it was decisive. Judge Harrison, a distinguished woman who had clearly been moved by the evidence and the scope of the conspiracy, delivered the sentencing with gravity befitting the magnitude of the crimes. Miranda received 10 years in federal prison for elder abuse, mortgage fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The judge noted that her position as my trusted daughter, combined with her systematic exploitation of that trust for financial gain, represented family betrayal in its most calculated and devastating form. David received 5 years for his role in the conspiracy, though the judge acknowledged his evident remorse and psychological breakdown as mitigating factors. While Mr. Patterson's actions were inexcusable, Judge Harrison stated the court recognizes that he was manipulated by someone with a more sophisticated understanding of financial fraud. Mr. Jenkins received 7 years and permanent loss of his professional licenses for his role in facilitating the fraudulent mortgage. You were the professional gatekeeper who should have protected Mrs. Patterson from this crime, the judge told him sternly. Instead, you became an active participant in her victimization. Most importantly, I was awarded complete restitution, the full $150,000 that had been stolen through the fraudulent mortgage, plus the return of my home, plus an additional $200,000 in punitive damages for emotional distress and my destroyed reputation. The court also ordered the immediate investigation and seizure of Crypto King's assets, which had been purchased with my stolen money. But the financial restoration, while crucial, meant less to me than Judge Harrison's formal statement vindicating my character and mental competence. Mrs. Patterson, she said, looking directly at me from the bench, you have endured a campaign of psychological and financial abuse that represents elder exploitation in its most sophisticated and cruel form. Your decades of expertise as a real estate investor, your sound financial judgment, and your mental competence have been systematically questioned by individuals who should have been your protectors. She paused, her voice growing stronger. This court formally recognizes that you are not a confused, elderly woman making false claims about property she doesn't understand. You are the victim of a calculated conspiracy designed to steal not only your life's work, but your very identity as a competent, successful professional. Those words, delivered in open court, recorded for posterity broadcast, globally restored something I'd thought was lost forever: my sense of professional worth and personal dignity. In the weeks following, the sentencing letters began arriving from across the country. Hundreds of them from real estate professionals who had followed the case, from families who had experienced similar abuse, from elderly property owners who wanted to express their support. Each one was a balm to wounds I'd carried for so long. The most painful correspondence came from prison. Miranda's first letter arrived 6 weeks after her sentencing, written in the shaky handwriting of someone whose world had completely collapsed. Dear Mom, it began, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I understand if you never want to see or hear from me again. But I need you to know that I'm in therapy now, trying to understand how I became someone capable of destroying the person who gave me everything. The letter continued for several pages, a raw outpouring of remorse and self-examination. She wrote about the gambling addiction that had consumed her, about the crypto losses that had made her desperate, about how she'd convinced herself that my property was somehow part of her inheritance that she could access early. I remember now what you sacrificed when I was in that hit-and-run trouble. She wrote, her handwriting becoming even more unsteady. How you used your savings to keep me out of prison, how you protected my reputation when I deserved to face consequences. You literally saved my life, and I repaid you by trying to steal yours. I don't know how to live with that knowledge." Reading her letter, I felt not triumph, but a profound maternal sadness. This broken woman was still my daughter, still the child I'd chosen to love unconditionally, despite learning she wasn't biologically mine. Her crimes were unforgivable, but she was paying a price that would destroy her entire future. David's letters were equally devastating in their honesty. His early correspondence had been desperate and self-pitying, but over time, his writing had evolved into something deeper and more reflective. "I'm taking classes in elder care advocacy and financial crime prevention," he wrote in one recent letter. "Learning about the psychological impact of what we did to you, the techniques predators use to isolate their victims. I see now that I wasn't protecting my family. I was participating in a crime that's more common and more devastating than I ever imagined. While I couldn't envision close personal relationships with Miranda and David in the future, I'd reached a place of cautious hope about their journeys toward understanding and redemption. The most meaningful reconciliation came with my grandchildren. Ethan and Chloe, now 17 and 15 respectively, had been devastated by learning the full truth about their parents' crimes. When they finally visited me at my restored home, they could barely speak through their tears. "Grandma Evelyn," Ethan said, "I know I said terrible things about you participated in those videos that made you look confused. I believed what Mom and Dad told me, and I was too young and stupid to question it. But I remember now. I remember the real you, the one who taught me about property values and investment principles." Chloe was even more devastated. "I made fun of your record keeping." She whispered, her face buried in her hands. "I actually laughed at the work that proved you were right all along." "I'm so sorry, Grandma. I want to learn about real estate investing from you the right way this time." These conversations weren't easy, and the healing process would take years. But they were real, authentic connections, built on truth rather than manipulation. For the first time since this nightmare began, I could see the possibility of genuine family relationships based on honesty and mutual respect. Crypto King Miranda's gambling associate was arrested 3 months after the trial when federal investigators traced the stolen funds to his cryptocurrency operations and luxury purchases. His arrest made national news, exposing the broader network of financial predators who targeted elderly victims' assets. The yacht and mining equipment purchased with my stolen money were seized and sold with the proceeds added to my restitution award. Seeing him led away in handcuffs, his empire of stolen wealth crumbling around him, provided a satisfaction that money couldn't buy. My victory was complete, but it was bittersweet. Miranda was in prison, her life destroyed by her own choices and addiction. David was struggling with guilt and the loss of everything he'd thought he'd understood about right and wrong. My grandchildren were in therapy trying to rebuild their understanding of family loyalty and moral responsibility. The truth had prevailed, but at such a tremendous cost. As I stood in my restored home for the first time in 3 years, looking at my returned investment records and my recovered property deeds, I felt not triumph, but a profound sadness for all the pain that could have been avoided if love had been stronger than greed. Still, my home was mine again. My professional reputation was restored. My financial expertise was officially recognized and valued. And for the first time in years, I could breathe freely in my own space, knowing that justice had been served and that my legacy would survive. The real work of healing could finally begin. 2 years after the trial ended, I stood in my restored home office on a peaceful Sunday morning, reviewing investment reports from the small real estate consulting service I'd established to help other seniors protect their assets. The familiar rhythm of analyzing market trends and property values felt like a meditation, a return to the authentic professional self that Miranda and David had tried so hard to erase. My cherished home was truly mine again, but it felt different now, not like a shrine to past betrayals, but like a sanctuary of hard-won wisdom and authentic relationships. Every room held memories that had been weaponized against me, but now those memories felt sacred again, protected by truth and honored by the family relationships we were slowly rebuilding. The guest bedroom, where Miranda and David had lived, rent-free for 2 years, had been converted into my new office, where I met with elderly clients seeking advice on protecting their property from financial predators. The work felt like coming home, using my expertise not just for personal success, but to protect an entire vulnerable population. Remember, I would tell my clients, anyone who tries to rush you into major financial decisions, especially family members who suddenly become interested in your assets, should be viewed with extreme caution. Document everything, trust your instincts, and never sign anything under pressure. The consulting practice had grown from a small favor for a neighbor into a nationally recognized program that was being studied by elder advocacy groups across the country. Miranda's letters continued to arrive regularly, charting her slow but genuine progress toward understanding and redemption. Her early correspondence had been desperate and self-pitying, but over time her writing had evolved into something deeper and more reflective. I'm working in the prison library now, helping other inmates with legal research, she wrote in one recent letter. Learning about the laws, I broke the people, I hurt the families, destroyed by financial fraud. I see now that I wasn't just stealing money, I was destroying the foundation of trust that families are built on. While I couldn't envision a close personal relationship with Miranda in the future, I'd reached a place of cautious hope about her journey toward making amends to the broader community of elder abuse survivors. David's path to redemption had been even more complex. His letters revealed a man struggling not just with guilt, but with the complete reconstruction of his understanding of right and wrong. I've been attending support groups for family members of gambling addicts, he wrote from his halfway house. Learning about how addiction can corrupt entire families, how good people can become accomplices to terrible crimes. I don't know if I'll ever be able to make amends to you, but I want to spend the rest of my life making sure other families don't go through what ours did. The reconciliation with Ethan and Chloe had been even more meaningful than I dared hope. Now, 18 and 16 respectively, they'd grown into thoughtful young adults who understood not just what had happened, but why it mattered for their own futures. Ethan had decided to study criminal justice, specializing in elder advocacy. I want to help protect grandparents like you, he told me with the fierce determination that reminded me of myself at his age. I want to use what I learned from our family's mistakes to help other families avoid the same tragedy. Chloe had become passionate about financial literacy education for seniors, helping me develop workshops that taught elderly property owners to recognize and defend against the kinds of fraud I'd experienced. What happened to you taught me that knowledge isn't just about protecting yourself, she'd said. It's about protecting the people who depend on you. Mr. Jenkins remained in prison, serving his sentence in isolation from his former colleagues. According to newspaper reports, he'd been completely ostracized by the financial community and would never work in banking again. I felt sorry for him, but I'd learned that some people choose their own prisons long before the law puts them there. My transformation into a national advocate for elder property rights had given new meaning to my life in ways I'd never expected. The memoir I'd written Stolen Home, A Fight for Family Property and Truth, had become a bestseller in the real estate and elder advocacy communities and helped countless families recognize the warning signs of property fraud and financial exploitation. Speaking engagements took me to conferences where I met other property owners and elderly victims who'd faced similar challenges. Young people especially responded to the message that property ownership comes with responsibility, that protecting assets sometimes requires tremendous courage, and that family loyalty should never mean accepting abuse. The local senior legal aid group I'd started had grown from a small volunteer effort to a nationally recognized organization that provided free legal assistance to elderly property owners facing family exploitation. We'd helped hundreds of seniors protect their homes and their financial independence. But the most profound transformation was internal. The woman who had once defined herself through service to ungrateful family members had learned to value her own expertise independent of others' recognition. The woman who had kept family secrets to protect people who ultimately betrayed her had found the courage to speak truth, no matter how painful it might be for others to hear. Standing in my home office on this peaceful morning, I felt my late husband's presence, not as a ghost haunting my memories, but as a warm assurance that love transcends betrayal, that honest work endures beyond theft, and that a life lived with integrity leaves ripples that touch generations. I was 72 now, with silver hair and laugh lines that spoke of joy rediscovered. My home was filled with laughter. Again, Ethan and Chloe's visits, the seniors I mentored through my programs, the young families I helped understand the importance of protecting elderly relatives from exploitation. My calendar was full of meaningful work, cherished relationships, and quiet moments of profound gratitude. Miranda had tried to steal my identity, my life's work, and my legacy. Instead, she'd given me something I'd never expected, the chance to discover who I truly was when everything else was stripped away, and the opportunity to become a voice for others facing similar betrayals. The woman who had once hidden her expertise to avoid seeming threatening to family members had become someone who used that expertise to protect an entire vulnerable community. The mother who had nearly died of heartbreak had learned that the heart's capacity for love and forgiveness is infinite, but that boundaries and self-respect are equally sacred. I was no longer just Miranda's mother or David's mother-in-law or a victim of family financial fraud. I was Evelyn Patterson, advocate, survivor, mentor, protector of elderly property rights. I was a woman who had faced the worst that family betrayal could offer and had chosen to respond with wisdom, courage, and an unshakable commitment to preventing others from suffering the same fate. In losing everything, I had found myself. In fighting for justice, I had discovered my true purpose. In choosing healing over bitterness, I had found peace. This was not the life I had planned, but it was the life I was meant to live. Years have passed since that terrible time when I thought my world had ended, and I can honestly say that my life today radiates an unshakable inner peace, hard-won through immense adversity. My cherished home, once threatened with fraudulent foreclosure and loss, is now a sanctuary of vibrant life and authentic purpose, frequently filled with the laughter of Ethan and Chloe, my grandchildren, our bonds rebuilt on honesty, respect, and deep affection. We've created something beautiful here, not just a restored household, but a living testament to the power of truth and the enduring value of fighting for what's rightfully yours. I've become a respected voice in the national conversation about elder property rights and financial protection, my story serving as both a warning and a beacon of hope for countless others fighting to preserve their life's work and their homes. My days are rich with newfound purpose, the quiet joy of my hard-won independence, the profound satisfaction of work that truly matters, and the deep contentment that comes from living authentically. Through my advocacy, my consulting practice, and my continued mentorship of vulnerable seniors, I've transformed my deepest pain into a source of protection and empowerment for elderly property owners across the country. Looking back on my arduous journey, I understand now that my greatest strength lay not in blind trust or silent endurance, but in courageously confronting deception and fighting for my fundamental right to dignity and financial security. I learned that self-worth is an unshakable foundation that no one can take from you, and that true family relationships must be built on transparency and genuine respect for each person's achievements and autonomy. I carry no bitterness toward Miranda, only a profound wisdom gained from transforming my deepest betrayal into a force for justice and protection in the world. This story is a testament to the insidious nature of family property exploitation and the devastating impact of elder financial abuse. But more importantly, it's proof of the profound courage that exists within each of us to fight for our fundamental rights and our homes. It demonstrates that truth will ultimately prevail, that integrity can be reclaimed even after devastating betrayal, and that a life of purpose and authentic connection is always possible. To anyone facing similar battles, know this: your property rights matter, your financial expertise has value, and you are never too old to stand up for what's rightfully yours. Document everything, trust your instincts, and remember that the most meaningful protection comes from your own knowledge and the courage to use it when it matters most.